Have you ever wanted to get into the Nintendo Game Boy as well as its other family members, the Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance? Then this is the video for you. We'll take a look at the various hardware options and games, and by the end you should have a decent understanding of what the Game Boy family of handhelds is all about. Before the Game Boy, there have been other handheld devices. Nintendo famously made the Game & Watch. Each handheld was its own game and used a segmented LCD screen. The Game Boy was a big deal when it came out in 1989 or 1990, depending where you live. Instead of each game being its own device, we have a portable console with games on cartridges. What a huge improvement that is. There were other handheld systems that offered screens which were lit and in color, but the Game Boy's cheaper price and comprehensive game library kept it in front. Over the years, the amount of different kinds of Game Boys increased. Thankfully, all Game Boys are region-free, so you don't have to worry about that stuff. Every system can play games from whatever region. Other than the original model, there's also the Game Boy Pocket, Game Boy Light, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance. And the Game Boy Advance in turn also ended up having different models like the Micro and SP. There's even home console options like the Super Game Boy 2, and Game Boy Player. All have various advantages and uses, but I'm going to start with the recommendation that makes sense for most people. And that is a Game Boy Advance Sp. I'm sure a lot of you know why. It has a lit screen and it's in color, and it plays Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and of course, Game Boy Advance games. There's two models, a front-lit and backlit model. Model number AGS001 is front-lit, and AGS101 is backlit. The backlit model is much more popular with people, but I will present you a case for the front-lit model. There's a difference in color reproduction. You'll notice a lot of games will look much more natural on the front-lit version, whereas some games on the backlit model will look like they have, like an ugly color palette. You do need a lot of light for the front-lit model though, so that's one disadvantage. In most environments, the backlit model will be much easier to see comfortably. But a GBA SP isn't the best solution for every situation. For example, if you have a Game Boy camera, well, it's going to be upside down because the cartridge slot is at the bottom. And if you're someone who wants to explore the realm of unlicensed games, specifically unlicensed Game Boy or Game Boy Color games, then those might not always work with a GBA either. Those are best played on their respective systems. I have one unlicensed game which actually has 4 games on it, and it only works on my Game Boy Pocket. And presumably also the original Game Boy because that's what it was released for. So while the GBA SP is the most practical device, there are some exceptions. The older Game Boy models are pretty cool and fun to collect. The original Game Boy is noteworthy for being the first, of course. Yes, the screen is small and an ugly shade of toxic vomit, but people who use Game Boys for any sort of music production know that it has the best headphone out sound quality of all. I think the Game Boy Pocket is one of the nicest looking handhelds ever. I think it still looks very modern, even though the non-widescreen screen obviously gives away the fact that it's not. The Game Boy Light is like a slightly bigger Game Boy Pocket with a lit screen that was only sold in Japan. So, that one obviously has JDM street cred. The Game Boy Color is nice because it also has backwards compatibility. And I'm also a fan of all the different colors it comes in. Like this one, which is Atomic Purple. The original Game Boy Advance, I find, has a really nice and ergonomic form factor. And hey, if you like to mod, you can throw in a backlit screen. Some of you probably would like that more than a GBA SP. And finally, I always thought the GBA Micro was really cool looking. Yes, it is kinda small, well, obviously, hence the name, but it has a decent screen even if it's the size of a stamp, and you can exchange the faceplates. Unfortunately, there's no backwards compatibility, but I guess the novelty of being so small kind of balances that out. But that's not all. What if you want to play on a bigger screen? Then you might want to look at these 3 options: the Super Game Boy 2, and Game Boy Player. The first 2 are Super Nintendo accessories that allow you to play Game Boy games on the Super Nintendo, while the Game Boy Player is an accessory for the GameCube. Out of the 3, the Game Boy Player is the most versatile unit. Essentially, it's a Game Boy Advance that connects to a GameCube. It does require a special disc for it to run, so if you get one, make sure you get that too. Back when I got my Game Boy Player, you could still get the disc from Nintendo, like on their website, but I don't think that's a thing anymore. I'm a big fan of the Game Boy Player, and it's definitely a good device. It even has link cable compatibility, and if you have a GameCube, Game Boy Advance cable, then you can use a GBA as a controller. There's also the Super Game Boy and Super Game Boy 2 for the SNES. Of course, those only run Game Boy games, so they're not as versatile. The first Super Game Boy also runs the games a few percent faster. The Super Game Boy 2 fixes that issue, but it's a Japan-only item. I should also mention that even though the Super Game Boys and Game Boy players can play games from all regions, the actual accessories themselves are a different matter. A Super Game Boy will only work in its specific region's Super Nintendo. Of course, there's ways around that, which isn't what today's video is about. But the topic of region modding and breaking tabs or whatever has been discussed on the internet to death, so a quick search is all you need. The Game Boy player does fit GameCubes from other regions, because the actual accessory is the same globally, but the startup disc needs to be from the same region as the console. Of course, there's modding again, but you get the idea. This is probably a good time to mention some non-Game Boy alternatives. A lot of the hardware is quite old, which means it can be difficult or costly to get a hold of not just the hardware, but the games as well. If you want to keep things Nintendo, then there's also the DS and DS Lite. They can play Game Boy Advance games, but nothing older than that. DSs are very plentiful and less expensive than GBAs, so if it's mainly those kind of games you want to play, then consider one of those. The Virtual Console is also an option. Many consoles like the 3DS and Wii U have that part of their eShop, but not the Switch. You can also go the non-Nintendo route and use modded systems and emulators, of course. PSPs are so easy to mod you could almost do it by accident. It has a nice screen, good controls, so yeah, that's a good option. Basically every device will have a Game Boy emulator available for it, whether it's a phone, tablet, or computer. I bet you can even get Game Boy emulators for Unix or FreeBSD or whatever. But I think if you're going to go down the emulator route, then you probably already know what to do anyways. Download the thing and put the thing on the thing and you can play the thing. Let's talk about games now. There's a lot of them. I'm mainly interested in Zelda and also Pokemon games when it comes to Game Boy games, so I'm going to touch on those subjects first. There's a lot of great Zelda games. Link's Awakening is one that should sound familiar since it was remade for the Switch. The original game is great and is one of the more unique Zelda games because of the story. The ending made Okayu cry, so that's all you need to know. There's two versions of Link's Awakening, not including the Switch remake. The original release is a Game Boy game, while Link's Awakening DX is a remastered version that can run on both the regular Game Boy as well as the Game Boy Color. That's the one I would recommend getting. These dual version games are easy to spot because of the black cartridge, rather than the gray. More Zelda goodness can be found with a set of paired games called Oracles of Seasons and Oracles of Ages, both for the Game Boy Color. There's connectivity between the games, which is pretty cool. It's done via passwords or link cable action. For the Game Boy Advance, there's Minish Cap, the last true 2D Zelda game. I'm not talking about any of that 2.5D stuff. This game right here is the last of its kind. It looks great and plays just as good. There's also other Zelda games for the GBA, namely ports of the NES and SNES games, so that's also worth checking out, of course. Obviously, when it comes to Game Boys, we need to talk about Pokemon. I was in elementary school when the series first became popular, and it was quite something. I lived in Germany at the time, and in Europe we got the show and also the first set of games in 1999, which I'm pretty sure is about a year later than in North America, which itself was a year behind Japan, I believe. A lot of my classmates and friends got Game Boys just for Pokemon. Most people didn't have a Game Boy Color at my school, even though it was already out. Most had original Game Boys, but they were colored variants, which I find was interesting. And it wasn't uncommon to see Game Boys in games that were color matched. I always thought that was pretty cool. While Blue and Red is where it all began, and of course, many people want to play that game, I think the Gen 2 games Gold, Silver, and Crystal are overall better. There's a lot of new Pokemon, there's 2 regions to play through, and Gen 2 introduced so many new things that are now standard in the series. Gen 2 games are Game Boy Color games. For the Game Boy Advance, there's Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, as well as remakes of Blue and Red, which are called Leaf Green and Fire Red. What I like particularly about these Gen 3 games is that they're the last true 2D games, with no use of any 3D visuals, just like Minish Cap with Zelda. It's also the smoothest running set of games. They run at 60 FPS, and after getting used to that, every game before and after feels a bit clunky and slow. Zelda and Pokemon games are the ones I'm most interested in, but obviously there's a lot more than that. Mario, Kirby, Tetris, Donkey Kong, the frickin' Game Boy camera. I think it's worth going through, all of these best Game Boy games lists, especially with the Game Boy family since it's like 3 consoles in total, and therefore quite a vast library with many genres being represented. When it comes to games, there's one topic that we should touch on, and that's batteries. And I'm not talking about the batteries in the system, but inside the cartridges. Given that some games can be several decades old, you're going to run into issues with them. Like with many cartridge-based games of the era, batteries were used for save games. Battery dead, save game gone. That being said, not all Game Boy games have batteries. And you have to keep in mind that Game Boy Advance games don't need a battery for game saves. On other occasions, batteries can also serve timekeeping functions, so always make sure to search up your game specifically. There's various ways to change batteries. Soldering is the best, and I don't recommend doing the taping method or any of that stuff, but, of course that's up to you. One thing that makes the world of Game Boys so interesting to me are the accessories you can get. Some of them can be really wacky and nonsensical in practice, making them more of a novelty, but there are some useful ones too. For people using any of the lit-screened options, I actually don't really recommend anything, except for a headphone out adapter for the GBA SP, because those have no, headphone out port. It's just like that weird proprietary plug thing. But if you have any sort of non-lit Game Boy variant, then maybe consider getting some sort of light attachment. There's even people making their own, so that could be a cool project if you're up for it. Most other things like screen magnifiers, grips, and things like that are usually, they don't quite work out in practice, I don't think. When it comes to those accessories, it's a bit like buying laxatives. Nobody enjoys spending money to get a big turd. But time heals all wounds, as they say, so a lot of the time their crappiness is what makes them appealing now. Another accessory that isn't really Game Boy specific are rechargeable batteries. Whether it's AA or AAA, might as well use those rather than disposables. Actually, this is probably a good time to bring up modding. Now, I haven't done any mods to any of my Game Boys because I like them how they are for now, but you can make something really interesting with a couple of mods here and there. Backlit screens are a common upgrade, as are rechargeable lithium-ion batteries. Something I've seen people do is take original GBAs and retrofit these components I just mentioned. I think that's a really attractive device overall. I prefer the ergonomics of that. It's more like holding a normal controller rather than how the original Game Boy design was, or even the later SPs where your hands are closer together. Maybe that's something I'll look into one day. For many years, the Game Boy family of handhelds ended up being the go-to portable device for gaming. Of course, that changed once the DS came out, and they wondered if it could even succeed. It certainly did in the end, but for me the Game Boy is still the first thing I think of when handheld consoles are mentioned, just because I was growing up during its heyday, which is why it brings up a lot of memories when I, not just play it, even just look at one. Since I can't cover every single topic about the Game Boy, please comment below on anything you'd like to add, like your favorite games, and especially when it comes to modding and accessories, because that's something I'm not too knowledgeable about. But still, I hope that was helpful. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.